Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, hopefully having an amazing day. We're going to cover some PlayStation 5 Pro stuff towards the latter part of this video. Of course, all of this will be timestamped, which you can find in the video's description. But I do want to start things out with the RDNA free mid-range GPUs known as N32, because we've been waiting for official confirmation of what the hell is going on with these things for so long at this point that it's kind of been getting ridiculous. Well, according to Lisa Su in AMD's Q2 2023 earnings call, we will see new enthusiast class Radeon 7000 series cards launch in the third quarter. Of course, these are going to represent N32. So far, the SKU names do appear to be the 7800 and the 7700. However, they could certainly change towards the launch period because it doesn't seem like, from what I'm hearing anyway, they're going to launch until the latter part of September. As for the pricing, well, of course, pricing again can change, but from multiple sources now I've heard around $500 to $550 for the higher end SKU and probably about $100 cheaper for the RX 7700. As for the performance, all the Watts on Twitter has actually stated that the RX 7800 is going to be roughly on par with the 4070. Meanwhile, the 7700 is going to be about on par with the 4060 Ti. Obviously, with all of these comparisons, it's going to depend upon what resolution, what game engine, etc, etc. And I would imagine Nvidia will continue to have the advantage in ray tracing and will probably be more power efficient as well. By the way, these performance numbers actually quite closely match what I leaked a while back as well. I think it was a Time Spy, or was it Firestrike? I think it was Time Spy that I leaked. Either way, it's going to be very interesting to see how these cards are received in the wider market. I don't have a huge amount to say about them because we've discussed the specs and performance so many times at this point. I'm just happy that AMD are actually confirming them. What impact it actually has in the market in the grander scheme of things is going to be very much up in the air. I'm also going to be extremely curious what AMD's strategy will be, given we've seen so many reductions in prices for various RDNA 2 cards, as well as even, of course, various 7900 series GPUs have seen big price cuts, and they're certainly not the only ones. Nvidia as well, like quite a few of their cards are not hitting MSRP, and let's just not talk about the 16GB 4060 Ti, shall we? But anyway, moving on, just briefly speaking of RDNA 3, I did want to also mention the RX 7500. All the Watts, again, on Twitter has actually leaked the specifications. I haven't personally heard much about this card, but just briefly reading what they've stated here, it seems about right. I mean, quite a while ago I was hearing kind of similar specs, but I've not heard anything recent, and to be honest with you, this GPU hasn't really particularly been of much interest to me, so I haven't done much digging, but again, it does sound kind of accurate. The GPU will be outfitted with 28 compute units, 8GB of RAM, and that's going to be running at 16 Gbps and with a board power of 130 watts. This card is apparently going to be retailing at around $220. Of course, it is going to depend on the final performance targets. From what I'm reading here, they've not actually leaked them, but let's just be honest. It's not exactly going to be competing with, anything particularly impressive. You know, at the end of the day, these cards, there's no such thing as like a bad launch. Generally speaking, obviously, if there's like crap tons of bugs or something, but it all is essentially price driven. This is still a little too expensive, at least in my personal opinion, and I think there probably will still be better cards available, particularly if you are willing to dig around on the used market. I also want to mention one small incy thing concerning Granite Ridge. So Zen 5, I've leaked a lot of stuff about recently, including IPC, performance targets, various things on the specification front. However, I haven't had time to confirm the shit with other sources, aside from one. So this has been told to me by one source, and a second source has told me that this is probably right, and that is that Granite Ridge has no changes to the Infinity fabric compared to its predecessor. So basically speaking, it's essentially running the same target in terms of memory support. The big question is, how much is this going to impact things like memory bandwidth constraints? It's probably going to depend, of course, a lot upon workload, that type of thing. It will be very interesting to see how memory speeds scale on this architecture for A, and also, of course, because we know that there will be X3D variants, because, well, of course, it will be also very curious to see how much of a performance advantage, let's say for the sake of argument, let's just compare one SKU versus another. So if you were to look at the percentage of difference between the 7950X versus the X3D 7950 X3D, and then you were to do the same thing with the 8950 versus the 8950 X3D, it will be very interesting to see how much more benefit the stacked memory actually bring, or so I say, the stacked cache brings. But yeah, obviously that's not 100% confirmed officially by AMD, but again, I've heard it now from a couple of sources, so it's going to be extremely interesting to see what Zen 5 brings. I'm hearing very good things. I suspect because we do have higher power limits on the server variants, this is not applicable for the desktop, because it still has the same power consumption figures. So this means on server, not only do you have all of the IPC gains, but you also have higher clock frequencies to desktop, as I've mentioned a couple of times. You're probably going to get some modest clock frequency gains, maybe a couple of hundred megahertz, but that's about it. Anyway, let's hop, skip, and leap our way to the PS5 Pro, shall we? Allegedly, it is utilizing the 4nm process, and I've got to tell you guys, that does sound about right to me. This is leaked by Kepler_L2 on Twitter, and they state that it's not using 3nm, it's N4P most likely. There isn't much difference in power/performance. N3E is mostly about logic density, and that just doesn't make much difference because it's going to increase the wafer costs. And obviously when it comes to consoles, price for the APU is extremely imperative because, well, basically speaking, they need to make as much profit as possible, or in the case of an early launch console that's a PS5 or Xbox or whatever, they don't want to lose as much money. I think it was like the original Xbox was losing a crap ton of money for Microsoft when it first launched, and it's certainly not the only one. I do have a PS5 Pro video which is almost finished. I've been trying to get a couple of details nailed down actually. I had actually also heard that there was a possibility it was 5nm for the PS5 Pro, but it seemed from all of my more recent info that it was 4nm. And obviously this is going to be very important when dealing with something like this, because it will also enable them to obviously suck down this power, higher clock frequencies. I think the PS5 Pro honestly will be a very exciting product if it launches. Obviously at the end of the day, this is not officially confirmed by Sony. All of my information, and I've leaked quite a bit about the PS5 Pro, and again there is another video coming out pretty soon, maybe the next couple of days, on the channel. All of my information does seem to indicate that it's very likely that it is being worked on. Obviously we saw the leaks from Tom Henderson, and my information back in May was also quite close to what Tom already leaked, what then Tom leaked in July. So I think that Sony at the very least were testing the hardware. Whether it finally gets launched or not, honestly couldn't tell you guys. I'm hoping the answer is yes, because I think it would be cool and I think it would be exciting, and I would be very curious to see potentially what we could get out of it. But maybe everyone's just going to hold fire until the PlayStation 6 or whatever. It's a very interesting one. Speaking of interesting, I just want to touch on something really briefly, and that actually concerns Nintendo. So, I think everyone and their mother knows that at this point, the Switch hardware is getting long in the tooth. In fact, it's so long in the tooth that at this point, the teeth basically are dragging along the ground and acting as anchor points. Like, the hardware was reasonably impressive at the time, but, you know, it is a hybrid console, and Maxwell, you can only do a certain amount, especially with the lack of memory bandwidth and blah, blah, blah. But, of course, there have been a lot of rumours concerning new hardware. So some of the earliest rumours, including from myself, actually, I leaked the fact that a new Switch piece of hardware was in development. And at that point, it seemed that the hardware was essentially a the best way of describing it is like an upgraded piece of hardware, a little bit like the PlayStation 4 to PlayStation 4 Pro. So it would basically play many of the same games, albeit with, you know, if the developer allowed it, they could release a patch, for example, with Zelda, and it would allow, of course, for higher resolution, blah. But then a lot of the information I was receiving seemed to indicate that this was no longer the case, and in previous videos, and I've put out several of them at this point, I was hearing that it was supporting DLSS. Obviously, they're using an Nvidia chipset, and it seems like the Nvidia leak itself from, I think it was some point last year, also seemed to indicate that this was true. And basically speaking, the system was considerably more powerful. The last update I think I put out was that the upgraded hardware was probably around as powerful as the Xbox Series S when leveraging DLSS. However, whether that was the final variant, which has now been apparently the hardware that is now in developers' hands, or whether that is an entirely different piece of kit, who knows? Because allegedly the Switch successor is actually now in developer hands. And of course, there are still a lot of questions here. From what has been rumored, though, this is from Video Gaming Chronicles Andy Robinson, so of course I'll link to the article, is now in the hands of key partner studios, and is going to launch some point in the latter half of 2024, which would be quite interesting because theoretically that's around the time the PS5 Pro is going to launch, and it's going to be like November, allegedly. The technical details that he has released, that is Robinson, is that it's going to use an LCD screen, so not OLED, insert sad face here. This is going to be because of manufacturing cost reasons, so it seems that it still will be a hybrid console. That matches very much what I was hearing as well. And basically, it seems that, of course, we will see much better visuals and so on and so on. But one thing it might have is not backwards compatibility. That has not been confirmed. I basically didn't really get any answer about the backwards compatibility as well. It would be very interesting if it didn't have that feature. I think it would be awesome if so, but maybe there's something to do with the actual physical cartridge slot, assuming it does have one, who the hell knows. Maybe they won't include it for, I don't know, like space reasons or cost reasons or whatever. But yeah, anyway, bottom line is this hardware is going to be extremely interesting if it does finally launch. With that said, guys, thank you very much for checking out the video. I'll see you soon. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.